Politico reporting in a bombshell expose that the Obama administration placed the DEA's investigation into Hezbollah's drug trafficking and money laundering operations on hold, all to ensure that the Iranian nuclear deal remained on track. Joining us now, Republican Congressman Robert Pittenger, who is urging the House to investigate that report in a letter he sent to the Oversight Committee Chairman Trey Gowdy. Congressman, thanks for joining us tonight. This is salacious stuff. It's scary that the lengths that perhaps the previous administration went through to get this Iranian deal done.
It is, sir. This is an egregious violation of the president's responsibility to protect this country. And that's why I want a full investigation. You have senior officials from Treasury, from Department of Defense who have spoken out openly with their names, not anonymously, conveying that they were impeded in the process of this investigation. So we must look at this. We must get to the bottom of it and find out exactly what was done.
Right.
And, you know, the impact of this is extraordinary. Hezbollah is responsible for transporting $1 billion worth of arms and drugs in exchange for cash. They are a major factor in our war against terror. Right. I just hosted a meeting in Buenos Aires just 3 weeks ago. Mariano Federici, my partner down there, we had 220 members of parliament and government leaders from 15 countries addressing this very issue, the nexus between the drug cartels and the terrorist organizations. And
just to bring the audience up to speed, this was a campaign dubbed Project Cassandra, launched in 2008 by the DEA after they amassed a whole bunch of evidence that Hezbollah had actually transformed itself, not just from a military and political organization, but into an international drug crime syndicate cartel.
Exactly. They were ready for prosecution, and they were impeded through this, in this process, by individuals in the administration. Different people have spoken out to this effect. So I think it's critical that we get to the bottom of it. Even frankly, I do believe that the Attorney General needs to be fully engaged.
I think the most shocking line, one of the more shocking lines from this article, is that the Obama administration threw an increasingly insurmountable series of roadblocks in the way. Now, I think one of the questions will be, was that perhaps, if this is true, to appease Iran or at the request and demands of Iran?
You don't know. We need to get to the bottom of it. Many people were involved in this article, and dozens of people were interviewed. A number of them are named personally. This is well-researched, well-sourced document. And I think we do need to understand exactly how it unfolded, because clearly this was done to help process a very misguided agreement with Iran. Every one of our friends in the Gulf states has said to me that it was a poorly constructed deal.
Right.
In fact, one of them said, sir, it's like if we went to Moscow, we negotiated an agreement with Ukraine without talking to Europe. We know Iran. If you don't, we do.
All right. Congressman Robert Pittenger, thank you very much for your time and your diligence on this. And obviously, we'll bring you back soon to get an update.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Tonight, a follow-up on Monday's report about a major publication alleging the Obama administration may have sabotaged its own government investigators' efforts to stop the Hezbollah terror group from turning profits on illegal drugs. Politico alleges it was all about the Iran nuclear deal. Joining us now, Josh Meyer, Politico's senior investigative reporter, the man behind this very elaborate story, digging into the former administration's alleged interference with the terror group and a DEA investigation. Great to see you tonight, Josh.
Great to see you.
Okay, so let's walk this through. For people who aren't familiar with this story, how in the world does this connect, all of these different prongs of investigations that were happening here through U.S. agencies, to a connection with the Iran nuclear deal?
It is a bit convoluted, but here the short version is that Hezbollah is a proxy of the Iran government, especially the IJO, which is, you know, the military wing of Hezbollah is a proxy to them. And so these federal investigators were watching and gathering evidence of Hezbollah sort of transforming itself from a political power and a terrorist organization to one that was trafficking in drugs and other criminal conspiracies to make, you know, hundreds of millions of dollars. And the theory was that they documented was that they were doing it to raise money to help rebuild after the Israel war and to help an expansion that they were doing globally. So they gathered evidence, they designated about a couple of dozen super facilitators, as people that were connected to the conspiracy, but when they really tried to delve deeply into these people, they got shut down.
And from what I understand in your reporting, there were problems at the State Department, the Justice Department, the DEA had been very involved in these investigations, and when people wanted to push forward, the administration was not especially helpful.
Right. And so, I wouldn't characterize it as one grand conspiracy. I think there's people on Twitter that would like to reduce this to that. What it was a series of actions, some that were taken specifically, intentionally, some that were sort of more part of a broader geopolitical sort of stew that they were doing, and other actions were just things that weren't supported and things that weren't approved. So over the 8 years of the Obama administration, you had potentially dozens of criminal cases that languished. People were transferred. Efforts to create a RICO prosecution were not supported, extraditions and so forth. So at the end of the day, when you really look at it, there's at least 7 or 8 of these major players that they allege were part of this conspiracy, leading the conspiracy, that are out there operating with impunity around the world.
So is the idea that they were not pursued, at least to the fullest extent of possibly they could have been under the law, because the administration was worried it would potentially blow up delicate negotiations over the nuclear deal with Iran?
Well, it's not, I wouldn't say they weren't pursued because of that. I would say that this is a fallout. I mean, what the story does, and I interviewed many dozens of people, reviewed thousands of records, shows that their policy of rapprochement with Iran and their effort to get the nuclear deal created a political climate where the result was a derailment of this policy. So some efforts were intentional, I think some were not, and I'd love to see a sort of full accounting of what happened.
We know there are already a couple of members, GOP members on the Hill, who are asking for that. Now I want to give you a couple of critics from the Obama administration, give you a chance to respond. First of all is Marie Harf, who used to be, of course, with the State Department.
Until Politico wrote this piece, I had never even heard of this program. The Politico story, this narrative in it, is just false. And there's no evidence in this story to back up their allegations. They quote a couple of low-level ideological sources who clearly don't like the Iran deal.
Okay, no evidence, couple of low-level sources. Then we hear from Tommy Vietor, used to be the NSC spokesperson for President Obama. He says in a tweet, there are many reasonable critiques of Obama's foreign policy. The idea that he was soft on Hezbollah is not one of them. The story is so manufactured out of thin air that it's hard to push back except to say that it's a figment of the imagination of 2 very flawed sources.
Right. So a lot of these people have similar themes to their sort of critiques, and so I couldn't resist tweeting back to him and saying, well, why don't you push back? Let's see some specifics here. And I'm a fan of Marie's. I talked to her when she was at the State Department, but she was at a different level at the State Department. She was a spokesperson, and to say that the people that I quoted were low-level people is sort of ridiculous. These were the people that led this task force. They were not ideologues. They're not flawed. I don't know what she's talking about. These were the people. One was a Pentagon person. One was a DEA person. But I also talked to many, many dozens of other people to get sort of ground truth and see if what their allegations were held up to the light of day. And so, this is not a story in 14,000 words where I was just taking some spin from some people. I mean, they spent months of meticulous reporting to document what was happening, talking to people outside of the administration. And so I challenge people to, let me know what the specifics are that they think aren't true.
It is an in-depth piece. I suggest people read it for themselves. Yeah. And we'll see if Congress does get involved. Josh Meyer, thank you for digging into it with us.
Sure.
Good to see you.
My pleasure.
Here now to react is former financial intel analyst for the Treasury Department who worked to publicly designate individual terrorists for the United Nations, Morgan Ortagus. Thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Good morning.
So to break this down for people, this was called Project Cassandra. And what it did, it allowed the DEA to get evidence that the terrorist group was actually amassing, $1 billion in drugs and weapons. But then when they wanted to do something about it, the brakes were pulled, basically.
And according to the report, it wasn't also just the DEA. It was actually over 30 different intel agencies that were a part of the U.S. government and our allies working together on this. So this was a project that spanned over many years of the Obama administration. Remember, Heather, that Hezbollah is an Iranian-backed Shia terrorist organization, and they're wreaking havoc around the world in the Middle East. But just in June of this year, U.S. authorities, federal authorities, arrested Hezbollah agents for looking to potentially attack the United States. So Hezbollah is a terrorist group that has been a menace in the region for a long time, but they're incredibly well funded, not only by the Iranians, but by the fact that they're able to traffic drugs, theft, money laundering all around the world to fill their coffers.
So all of this money coming into them, why in the world would the brakes be pulled on all these organizations, not just the DEA?
Right.
And how would it tie in to the success or failure of the Iran deal?
So in the Politico report, it was not just a few disgruntled DEA agents that came forward. The Politico author said that he interviewed dozens of people who were a part of this. So it was very extensive research. And while they didn't offer explicit proof that that the Obama administration politically stopped these prosecutions, a former Treasury official, Catherine Bauer, testified before Congress that these prosecutions were slowed down in order to make room for the Iran deal. Now, this isn't the first allegation against the Obama administration that they were doing things to placate the Iranians in order to get the deal through. But this is the first time where we've seen dozens of former federal intelligence analysts coming forward to say this was politically motivated to stop the research that we were doing to stop a terrorist group worldwide.
Yeah, a lot of people very upset about this report. We have a statement from Congressman Pittenger. He had this to say. He said, these revelations are shocking and infuriating. While American soldiers were bravely fighting ISIS terrorists, with some paying the ultimate price, the Obama administration reportedly was protecting Hezbollah terrorists who were funding themselves by trafficking illegal drugs. No wonder President Obama couldn't bring himself to call them radical Islamist terrorists.
Yeah, and I think the nuance that the congressman doesn't get right is that ISIS is a Sunni group and the Hezbollah is Shia. So these are two very different factions. Hezbollah is fighting in Syria, and so you have hardened Shia, Iranian-backed Hezbollah fighters that are coming off the battlefield that could potentially continue to wreak havoc in the Middle East. They could attack here. And so what does the administration need to do going forward? Ted Cruz also called for congressional investigations in this. I think former CIA Director John Brennan needs to go before Congress and testify because he was part of this bigger
with the ultimate
plan.
Result being possibly what? I mean, what can happen now that this has already occurred?
Well, what can happen now is that the Trump administration can put a new focus on Hezbollah. The Trump administration has a new focus to counter Iran, a new strategy for the Middle East. And so I believe that the Trump administration, I'm sure they're probably starting to do this, should put an interagency task force back together to target Hezbollah, to go after their financing, to go after the money laundering, and how they're trafficking, cocaine allegedly into the United States.
It makes no sense at all.
Very elaborate.
Really yeah. All right. Thank you so much for Morgan. We appreciate you joining us. Big topic.